Hey everybody, welcome to VTX Podcast Episode 2. I have a very cool guest this week. His name is Bill NOBES. Bill's a very talented sound engineer, video producer, theater producer, lighting expert, multimedia expert, you name it. He has a studio in South Jersey called Dirty Old Robot that has full analog capabilities. You can go right from microphone to tape. And he took on a very ambitious project last year called Analog Trenton, where he recorded 40 different bands, and many of which went right from microphone to vinyl without any digital conversion or processing in between. But more impressive than that whole production and how it was created was Bill's sense of community and the amount of different genres and artists. He got, painters and sculptors involved. And he really brought the community together and created a project that not only focused on the music as the end, but the production and the collaboration of the music as, an art form in itself. So I hope you really enjoy Bill's interview. He talks a lot about, in the beginning, he talks about how he likes to dive deeply into culture. And then we talk a lot about Analog Trenton and how he likes to record music in the analog realm, and there's just a lot of great gems and great takeaways in this episode, so I hope you enjoy. Without further ado, here's Bill NOBES. Bill NOBES, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Man, a lot of great things going on that I want to talk to you about.
It's been busy.
I can imagine. So you got your production studio, Dirty Old Robot.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the shirt, by the
You're
way.
You're very welcome.
So what's the lettering about?
That just says robot.
Just says robot?
It's one of those things where I've been using the name for a couple decades now because someone called me that a bunch of years ago. It didn't mean it as a compliment, but I loved it so much. I'm using that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's a really cool. Yeah,
so,
I like it.
And then I was trying to figure out a logo, and that just came up into my mind because for a while I tend to take deep dives into culture. And I did Japanese for a year where, ate everything. And we were going to the anime cons with my son. And we were, right, even now we have Japanese beds in our rooms and tatami mats and stuff. So that was a couple of years ago. So that's always been a part of our lives in the house for a while. Right now it's Russian and Soviet culture. I don't know if you noticed all the Soviet stuff in my studio when you were there. But
I didn't. I was looking at all the gear. I was like really paying attention to that.
I got a bunch of Soviet synthesizers and things.
Oh, yeah.
But what turned me onto the Soviet thing, I know I'm going on a tangent. We're just starting, but I'm going already.
Go for it.
Is, I've studied NASA and stuff for years, and I was a big fan of the space program. Then after years of people saying, that we have to beat the Soviets, I'm like, okay, they were ahead of us, so why do we, look down on them? And I started researching their history, and even in the world of music, they were way ahead of us. They were some of the pioneers of electronic music and experimental music. There was this one composer, I forgot his name, but he would do these compositions that involved an entire town and fleets of ships and steam engines and guns and cannons. And Skryabin was a famous Russian composer who was very well known for atonal stuff. And some of the earliest synthesizers, the A&S synthesizer was an optical synthesizer. And the theremin, kind of revolutionized electronic music because that was what inspired Robert Moog because that's what he started with. He started with building theremins. And so all of his development grew from the theremin. And if you look into that story of Louis Theremin, and he was sent here to spy. And he disappeared and ended up in a gulag, and then ended up in a Sharashka, which is a research gulag. And then he worked with Tupolev and Korolev. Korolev built Sputnik. So when you dive into this history, it's really just amazing what you come up with. So hence the recent obsession with the Soviet history and culture and science.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've heard of especially tubes. Some of the Soviet tubes are sought after to for some of the equipment, And oh man, if you get to link up with Joey in the near future, he can talk to you about Japan too.
I've noticed on his Instagram feed, he's big in the Japan thing.
Totally. So, Dirty Old Robot, amazing facility. You have amazing gear, and you're really, put an emphasis on the analog side of recording.
Yes.
And One of the things you said in that little write-up was you're looking to facilitate authentic creation without overproduction.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, let's start with just the analog part. I'll start with that because I was thinking about that today, and I remembered that I'd built my first mixing board at the age of like 8 or 10 or something like that. Just a 2-pot fader for a theater, for a school theater, where I had a reel-to-reel and a cassette, and to do crossfades. I built this thing out of rheostat, so I had this big chunky black knobs and things, but it worked. And I'd always built my own stuff and designed my own circuits when I was young. And so I've always been into wires. So I got the idea, about 3 years ago to build an analog studio. I'm not really sure where it came from. I get a lot of voices in my head that tell me to do things. And that was one of them. And I just started in the process and started working with it and seeing what could be done. And as you saw, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. Now, as far as authenticity, analog's not better than digital, and digital's not better than analog. It's like saying what's better, Photoshop or oil paints. It depends on what you want to make, and it depends who you are as an artist and what you want to express. One of the dangers of digital is it's so easy just to throw another plugin and throw another plugin. It takes away some of the necessity to be creative at times. So when you're in the analog realm, you're stuck with the tools you have. If you have 3 compressors, you have 3 compressors. You can't go stacking them up. Unless you burn and then do another track with it. So you have to be creative, and you have to really work with what you have, and that contributes something to the work. At least I find it does. And by putting these restrictions on, I find, at least when I work, it's much easier to stay closer to the truth. I view production and mixing as finding the golden thread within the song. And it's there already. My job is to get the other stuff out of the way. And I find with digital, even though I say this in my head, I have what I end up doing is just putting more stuff on top and obscuring it, trying to fix something that can't be fixed or add something that shouldn't be added. So that certainly is the trend that I tend to follow.
Yeah, I noticed that in my production too. Like, it's easy to get caught in a pattern with digital because I'm just going to compress everything. I'm just going to EQ everything. And it's like I would, do things kind of by default rather than actually this track needs this or something. It was just kind of like a default I would go to. And I guess, putting that limitation on it can force you to think a little bit differently depending on a project-to-project basis.
I was listening to a podcast with a very well-known mixer in Nashville. I don't recall his name. But first thing he does when he gets a mix is replace all the drums with samples. And, if that's your genre and that's the way you work, that's great because it's very popular. It's very commercially successful. That's not what I like to do. I want to have the mistakes in there because I think that's more human personally. And that's what I like. I grew up artistically in New York City, in the East Village, first just going to the little clubs and listening to the live music, and then working in clubs and being the sound guy, technical director and stage manager, from everything from tiny little bands to working with, Deborah Harry, Patti Smith on my stage, a lot of people. But even more importantly than that were the really creative people that were never going to be commercially successful, but doing it because they wanted to, and they were passionate about it. And that live aspect, that energy, even then when you would buy their record or tape or whatever, very frequently that energy wouldn't be on there anymore because it just didn't translate to the studio. So part of what I wanted to do is to create this space that would, we'd still multi-track and everything, but to try and keep that energy and keep that live authenticity and that feeling and produce that way.
That's and you really captured it with Analog Trenton.
That was the whole goal, is to, because when I got to Trenton, I came across this scene. I thought I was done discovering amazing music scenes because I was in Hoboken when that was exploding, and then East Village and the Meatpacking District, and they all ended. And then I got to Trenton. It was different than those scenes, much more raw, and also much more collaborative and much more diverse. So I was already building the studio before I ever got into Trenton. And when I got to the point I was ready to record something, I'm like, okay, rather than just keep buying more gear, let me invest in this project. And just started recording. And the idea was to keep that live energy and that while you are here listening to it, feel.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about Trenton, like some of the artists you've come across and people you've worked with, and like some of the venues maybe that you've been collaborating with.
Well, Trenton, I've lived 20 minutes away since 2003, and I didn't even know any of this was there. I had met a person that I became friends with, and he said, "You got to come to the coffee shop." And the next day I showed up at the coffee shop and it just took off from there. Before long, I'm running events at the coffee shop, from theatrical stuff to light stuff and multimedia installations, and I'm doing stuff for art all night, and all these things are going on. And there are two things that are unique about the Trenton music scene as it is right now. One is the diversity. In one night, you can see hip hop, hardcore, folk on one stage. And that doesn't really happen. And not only is musicians into it, but the audience is equally into it too. And that's a very open and accepting environment. The other thing is it's very collaborative across the arts, meaning that there's so much art going on. A lot of these musicians are also, painters or sculptors, and even if they're not, the communities are integrated. They're together. Which is why in Analog Trenton, at one point, I was getting so much support from the visual artists. I decided I needed to include them too, because they were really so supportive of this project. So that's when I raised a little more money and was able to get the work of 27 artists. So we're on video. I can actually show. So we have art there, and we also took Polaroids of everything. So the whole inside is full of Polaroids, and then we have art on the sleeve. Sorry, keep hitting that mic.
No worries.
And on the sleeve. And in the CD, there's a 8-page booklet with more art on it. So we're representing as much of the artistic community as possible with this project, which is cool.
So you're a little bit limited with the amount of tracks you could fit on the vinyl. Was it hard trying to select?
Well, the first thing I figured when I started this, I'd be, happy if I got 20. Like if I can get 18 or 20 bands, that'd be cool. And I had to stop at 40. And, people were still calling, can I get on it? But I just, was out of time. And so, yeah, the vinyl, as it turned out, could only hold 13. Which was sad. Going to a double CD wasn't that much more expensive. It was like an extra $700, so that was a no-brainer. But going to the triple or quadruple vinyl would have been several thousand more. And the project came in at $18,000. It was not an inexpensive project. We did an Indiegogo to raise a bunch of it. We had some sponsorships. Notably, Sweetwater Music sponsored us, which my sales rep there was shocked because they said they have a policy of no out-of-state sponsorships.
That's amazing.
But I sent it to them, and actually I requested either a discount or just loan me some gear because I was a little low on outboard. And they said, we can't do either of those, but here's a check. No, it wasn't a lot, but it was still, it was something. So I was really grateful for that, and I appreciated that. That was
something I want to talk about too, about the sponsorships and the crowdfunding. What's some advice you might have to people that have like maybe a decent sized project they want to do and want to look for that source of income?
I've always heard that on the crowdfunding, let's start there, that it's a full-time job, and it is. Crowdfunding is very much a full-time job, and part of why I wanted to do it was for this project, I knew I could come up with the funds either way because, I just had some things coming in over the course of 2 years from a previous business thing. So I wanted to try it knowing that if I failed, the project wouldn't be sunk. And it's hard. First of all, it is a full-time job, just keeping up with all the, things coming in and posting stuff. And I remember this time last year, running up into Thanksgiving, I was editing video every day, because I was doing this big push right before Thanksgiving. And that's how I spent my Thanksgiving, and the days before it was posting stuff because that was the end of the project. The other thing about crowdfunding is you're only going to fund to the network that is available to you, meaning I could not get any outside networks interested in this. I couldn't get any press coverage on the crowdfunding. I didn't have enough clout or enough whatever to get people to, cover the crowdfunding aspect of it. So the crowdfunding was all local people in Trenton and, you know, a lot of the artists and the fans and the people in the scene. And I was sad about, you know, that we couldn't get it further because I didn't want them paying for the project. I was doing it for the community. But then, you know, as far as the crowdfunding, it was all community that chipped in.
Where did that limitation come from? Is it because of the platform, or is it just
well, it's because of me. I didn't, you know, I could only market to those I knew. You know, I tried to, you know, get press interested, but they're not really interested in something so early because so many things fail that if you don't have a track record, they're not going to be that interested. So, you know, as things have become more concrete and gotten done and released, the press is far more interested. But in the beginning, they were like, yeah, sure you are, because it's an ambitious project. So when you say, I'm going to do this, they're going to like, yeah, all right, sure, all right, because they've heard it all before. So I wasn't able to really publicize it beyond my network I have already. And I've heard that too, that if you have a podcast with 30,000 listeners, then you have a much bigger chance. I only had my Facebook and Instagram with, you know, whatever people I had. So that was a challenge. Now I did choose the Indiegogo, the flexible funding, meaning whatever we got, we got. There was no, you know, the other one where you have to reach whatever or you don't get anything. I did not do that. Because I knew I was going to go ahead with the project either way, so I had that, you know, flexibility at least. But yeah, crowdfunding is hard.
Those are the ones like you have to reach a certain goal,
yes.
Otherwise, okay, yeah.
If you don't reach X thousands of dollars, you get $0.
Oh, I see.
With the flexible funding, you know, whatever you get at the end of the campaign.
And how about the corporate sponsorships?
I begged and basically begged. It was mostly for discounts. ATR Magnetics, you know, the tape stock was one of the biggest costs of the project, biggest single cost of the project. So they gave me a discount. The mastering house threw in some free reference discs and things like that, saved me a little there. The pressing house in Bordentown. I mean, I met Sean, who runs the pressing plant, independent record pressing, a couple of years ago. So I'd already had that relationship built up, and I did some video work for him. So he you know, gave us a very large, you know, break on the pressing. And the same thing with the CD and the printer gave us a sponsorship in the form of discount. And of course, Sweetwater Music.
That's great. And so at this point, you've got all the vinyl in.
Everything's
in. Like, so do you consider Analog Trenton part one of rap? And now you can...
Part one rap, now the hard part starts.
Interesting.
Because it's a lot harder to market music than to make it. And I'm starting to, I mean, I've had some background in marketing before, and it turns out that music is no different than marketing anything else, especially now. The gatekeepers are gone, and the more research I do, the more I realize all these things you read about, you know, the playlists, the pay-to-play stuff, they're all bogus, pretty much.
That's like playlist push and like that sort of stuff, like for Spotify and things?
Yeah, I don't know any particular brands or names offhand.
Gotcha.
But pretty much, you know, in the research I've done, you're better off just buying a lottery ticket for what good it'll do you. You have to do it yourself, and it's a long road and it's a slog. And I'm also starting to hear that no one, you know, at our level, at the lower levels, no one's making money on CDs, vinyl, or streaming. That it's all merch, performance, and alternate content. By alternate content, things on your YouTube channel, where the music you're making is just one offering of a range. I just keep doing that, of a range of products. And you know, that brings it right into, you know, content marketing, and that brings it right into the Gary Vee world. I don't know if you know anything about Gary Vaynerchuk. You live up
hustle.
Yeah. And although, you know, I think Gary Vee goes a little too far, and it only works for people like Gary Vee, a lot of his core messages is accurate. And that was, in some ways, that's a little depressing, because you have to spend so much time thinking about marketing. And on other ways, well, at least there's a roadmap, because you can look at the content marketers and see how that world works and decide what of that works for you. Like, you know, some people aren't going to go want to write songs for TikTok. Other people will. Other people really want to do what is passion to them, and they should, if that's what they want to do, they should do that. But they should look in that sphere for ways to, you know, use what's available in you know, YouTube or TikTok or whatever, to get where you want to go. Just like we were talking before we started, we're both putting up video in our studios because that's an important part of music today. And I could also argue that not only is the visual aspect important today, it's important historically, because until the phonograph came along, music was something you saw as well as listened to, because you went to a concert, or you had your piano in the parlor where someone played frequently, and only from the phonograph until YouTube, or I guess until MTV, that was the only time music was just listened to. But once MTV came along and now YouTube, music is returning to a very visual medium. And also, as we were saying, musicians are mostly making their money on appearances now. So that, again, we're going back towards a more visual aspect of music. And video is a good tool to add to the toolbox.
Definitely. This one's going to be an interesting one to market because it is a compilation album. So there's so many people involved. And one thing that I love about it is that, being from New Jersey and not far from Trenton, if there's a specific track or song or artist that I'm into, those people are accessible. Those are all local people. And it's just so cool. It's like a showcase, to have that. Are there any other kind of like angles that you're trying to take when?
Well, definitely, because one of the things, when you look at the roadmap for traditional modern day music marketing, you have to be in a genre. So I'm like, okay, we're in the compilation genre. It turns out there is no compilation genre. There's no Grammy for compilation. There's no Spotify playlist for compilation. There is for soundtracks. There's a Grammy for soundtracks, and there are plenty of playlists for soundtracks. But if you're an honest-to-God compilation, there's no place to go. Because compilations are assumed to be collections of otherwise recorded material, whereas Analog Trenton is 100% originally recorded. And that was also, a little tangent, one of the goals of this is I wanted to have everyone recorded on the same gear in the same way to give every band a level playing field. And also, one of the corners I refused to cut was the mastering, was the replication and the duplication. We used a mastering engineer in New York, Carl Rawati. True Tone Mastering has been doing it for 40 years. And one of the few people in the country who still know how to take a tape and make a lacquer out of it with no digital. So the vinyl is digital from microphone to lacquer. And that's kind of rare these days. And I wanted to see, what these bands sounded like, all given the same level playing field. And it worked better than I expected. I was really shocked the first time I listened to it. It's like, it sounds like an album.
Yeah, I need to get a record player, but or a new belt for the one I have, because I slip and it's like slowing down speeding up. That's a pain. But I've had the CD in the car since you gave it to me last time I came to visit, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah,
it's a fun album, I think. Yeah. It's very mixed, and I love that about it.
Totally.
Now, as far as the other angle, it took me a long time. I've rewritten the press sheet about 20 times over the last year and a half, because what I finally realized was it's not a music project. It's actually a living art project. And by that, I mean, for a while, I've always been kind of really interested in the idea of production as performance art. Because, I've been involved with theaters. I started my own theater company when I was 10 or 11, Mad Scientist Productions. And then later in my 20s, I went off to work professionally in theater in New York. I had a corporate job, and I hated it. Well, and I also, in my early 20s, I had a video production company in, where was I? West New York, North Bergen, up there. And did that for a while. Did not do well at that. No idea what I was doing. But so I've been, in the production world for most of my life. And I always found production fascinating. And I working in Trenton, I decided to try and bring the idea of production as performance. So I was doing that at the coffee shop, just making sure people were there to see how it was set up and how it was created. And then I extended it further with Art All Night when I did the all-night 24-hour video music marathon, where we shot 3 music videos in the middle of Art All Night, where the crowd was, in some cases we pulled the crowd into it. And I took that even further with Analog Trenton, in that we did 3 location days. 2 location days at Champs, which is one of the better known venues in Trenton. There are only a couple venues in Trenton. It's not a place with a lot of venues in it. We had to haul all the gear. It took a school bus and a Jeep to get everything there. It was pretty stressful. It took me like 12 hours to pack it all. And it was open to the public, so people could come in and watch this thing being made, and that was kind of cool because we were also trying to figure out how to make it. To do a multi-track recording of a band on a stage in a venue was a little challenging because at first we just put them up like they would normally be, and they're like, well, that didn't work. So we had to pull the singers off and turn the microphones around so they weren't facing the drums anymore. And it took us a little while to figure it all out. And the audience got to see all this and to see, how a record is made. And in one case, there was Molly Rhythm was an 8-piece band, and we just had to, we had to retract the vocals because it was just so much spill. And it was really amazing to see their reaction, the audience that came to watch this stuff. They were like dumbstruck about the process. They were like, I had no idea any of this happened. And, we Art All Day last year, we did another recording day at the Trenton Coffee House. And that was kind of cool because I soon figured out that the more theatrical I was, the more the audience was into it. So I would have cues like holding the clipboard up and my cues for the band to start going and the reels to start moving. And, once I pointed at the artist, that you could hear them all hold their breath in the audience. And then I would always hold my clipboard up until the guitar rang out. And then when the clipboard came down, that meant the tape could stop and we were done. And the whole audience would release their breath. And just to feel that tension in the room, that glorious tension, was really an amazing experience. And then the way the whole community did participate in this and get involved with it and talk about it. People were writing songs for the album. People were, collaborating to form new mini groups to be on the album. It turned into just an expression of art within the community, an expression of cohesion within the community. And that is what I want to try and show. Because I'd like to take this, get as much exposure as possible, take it as national as possible, to show how a community can work with itself and how art can change lives in a positive way.
That's beautiful, man. And great project. Sounds amazing. Great to hear about your background and this project, and wishing you the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.